This is Andrew Seamer from Inventive.io. Today we're going to learn Emmet for HTML and CSS automation. So let's get started by opening Sublime. Sublime is the editor that I'll be using, but you can get Emmet for a bunch of different IDEs. We'll start by opening up package control to see if we already have Emmet installed. As you can see here, I actually do not have Emmet installed. So what we can do is go to install a package. And once we're done loading repositories, we simply search for Emmet. You'll see there's a few things in here. The one we want is Emmet for SublimeText. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. And in the lower left, you'll see it's installing packages, Emmet specifically. All right, once this is loaded, the key here that you want to look at is it actually explicitly calls out that you must restart your editor. In Mac, this isn't simply closing out the window. You actually need to go down to the control panel and select quit on that particular application. Then we can start Sublime again. And once Sublime boots up, we should be able to go back to package control. And inside of package control, you can now type Emmet. And you'll see a whole bunch of different options here. So we'll go ahead and walk through all of these options. So to get started, we need to save our document as an HTML document. And once we do that, we now have index.html in my case. So the first thing that's of most interest is you can simply get started by typing in an exclamation point, and the magic comes in when we hit tab. We'll go ahead and zoom this in a little bit so you guys can see a little better. So all of that from tab. So we can always go back by hitting Command Z or Control Z in Windows. The other thing that we can do is just start typing HTML like we normally would. The key here with Emmet is the syntax is a little bit different. So I can type out HTML and hit tab. That gives me two HTML tags. Inside of an HTML, I can use the greater than sign to say that this particular element is going to be a child of the HTML tag. That gives me HTML with a head tag. And if I wanted to, I need to have a body tag, but it needs to be at the same level as a head tag. So there's a couple things I can do. I can either do plus and then body, and that gives me the head tag followed by a body tag. And then once I have the head and the body, there are some things inside of the head tag that I might be interested in having. I may want to have a style tag as an example. But if I leave this as specified, then body is going to be a peer or a sibling element to style. So we'll go ahead and see what that looks like. And that isn't exactly the right syntax that we were looking for. So what I need to do to rectify this is called grouping. So I can group the head and the style element and then put plus body. And what that gives me is the syntax that I was looking for. So I have a head tag with a style inside of it and a body. Now the other way I could have done this is instead of using grouping, I could have specified that I want to take the body tag up a level. I do that by specifying the caret, and then I can do tab, and that gives me the same syntax. I don't find this syntax to be as easy to read as if I stick with grouping, so I tend to use the grouping more often than not. So by simply having HTML head, style, and body, if I leave this cursor in the middle and hit tab, then what I end up with is the plus body after the HTML document. Emmet does not interpret anything after where the cursor is. So we always want to make sure that we go to the end of the line when playing with this. So let's take a look at what we can do inside the body. I'm going to start by adding a div tag, and inside of that div tag, I will add a div tag. And that would generate the HTML that you might expect. If I was building a real example, I might have 6 of these div tags. In Emmet, you can specify that by simply using a multiplication sign and then the number of items that you want. And so what that's given me is 6 div elements inside of this other div element. That's pretty useful. So where this gets interesting is this particular div tag, maybe we actually want to know which item it is. So in this case, we're going to need a class on it. So we can do an item class and then give us 6 of those. But that doesn't necessarily make each item unique by itself. So a pattern you might see is item and then item 1, which allows me to style each of these individual elements on their own. So how would we do that? So we can do item.item and then use a $sign. And that $sign pulls in the iteration number. So every iteration that I'm making, I can use the number that's specified by that. So now you've seen that we've generated 2 classes, an item and an item 1 through item 6. So now I can specify each element if I want to, or just have a general item set of rules. Very good. Sometimes we might have HTML elements that instead of classes, we want to use something like an ID. So we can use ID syntax inside of Emmet simply by using the £, just like you would in CSS. So now I've got an ID instead of a class called container. And let's say inside of each of these items, we wanted to put something like a span. So I can say span, and inside of that, I actually want to have some text. So doing text, I can say this is element, and then again use that $sign, which should give me spans inside of each div, but specifically this is element 1. Element 2, etc. So that's also very useful. So let's change this up, and instead of the span, maybe we want to have some checkboxes inside of our div tags. So we can do input checkbox, and that should give us a checkbox. So input type checkbox name ID inside of all of our divs. Not terribly helpful since we didn't actually specify a form. So let's jump back in our HTML here, and we can specify a form which has a container that has all these div items and checkboxes. So each of these checkboxes may need to be styled individually. To do that, we can specify a class just like we normally would. Maybe we call this a box item. And if we expand that, you'll see that each of our input type of checkbox now has a class called box item. That's great. So you don't have to specify all of this in one line. We can actually work through here and expand our HTML to a certain point, and then from that point we can start typing like we normally would. So let's go ahead and style our container, and maybe the container we want a background, so we can do something like BG and tab that out. So as you can see, now I can start to work with individual elements. Maybe we also want to specify in our item, let's give the item maybe a border, so we can do that by typing border, and we can say let's call it solid, 2 pixels and black. Very easy. All right, let's see what we have so far. Cool, not very pretty. But as you can see, we have individual items styled with borders, and we have all of our checkboxes in here. Let's give that a little bit more space so that we can see exactly what's going on. So inside of our container, let's go ahead and add maybe a paragraph, and inside the paragraph, let's go ahead and type a span. If we tab that out, that gives us what we want. So we can do hello world. Very simple. I also wanted to mention that there is meta tag generation. Specifically, if you find yourself building responsive apps locally, you may already be aware that there's a viewport hack that you can use inside of a meta tag. And so Emmet also has that. You can do meta:viewport. And this basically gives you width, device width, scalable, scale, etc. All of this is to get around working in various browsers so that the browser will actually respond in its debug environment. Obviously, this is a lot to type out and even more to remember. So again, meta:VP. So I do want to mention that Emmet is a very large topic. It's spanning all of HTML, CSS, and a few other things. And so you do want to be aware that inside of docs.emmet.io, there is a cheat sheet specified. And in here, you'll see all the syntax for HTML creation, all the shortcuts for how to group, how to specify text. And then if you continue scrolling, notice that it scrolls for days because it does cover every single HTML element. But you'll also find there's a CSS section down here in the middle, and all of the various properties that you can play with inside of CSS are also listed to include their defaults. And there's also at the very bottom, I believe it was XSL, so styling XML, or working with XML. So you can again play inside of all of this. This is also, just want to remind you, not limited to just Sublime. You can use this in a bunch of different editors. Hopefully all of this was helpful for you. Again, this is Emmet for HTML and CSS Automation. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to me at hello@inventive.io. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you did find this video useful, please share this out with your friends. Thank you.